Hi, this is Ted Price from Insomniac Games. One of the more beautiful games to be released this year, in my opinion, is Spiritfarer from Thunder Lotus. Its art, its theming, its gameplay are a refreshing break from a lot of the larger games we've been seeing grabbing headlines. I am a big fan, and I was really happy to have a chance to talk with Will Dubé, who's the CEO of Thunder Lotus, and Nick Guérin, its creative director. Join us as we talk about creating such a unique and stylized journey for players.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
Will, Nick, it is great to have you guys on the Game Maker's Notebook. Thank you very much for taking the time to chat.
Thank you, Ted, for having us. Yeah.
Well, I've been really curious about how both of you originally got into the games business, because I know you have been in the games business for a while before starting Spiritfarer. But what inspired you to jump in?
Will, do you want to go?
Well, both Nick and I have different backgrounds. I started in mobile games out of school. I had done a Bachelor of Computer Science with a double major in Computational Arts, which was very broad, but also a great base for video games because you basically get to look at a whole bunch of different things. So out of school, being in Montreal, we're very lucky to have a really amazing ecosystem, a lot of different studios, a lot of opportunities for games. It's really an amazing studio for game developers. And I was able to find a job as a level designer in a mobile game company. We're doing it was a startup. We were doing free-to-play mobile games. And then in 2014, I'd been, watching all these amazing games get made on Kickstarter and seeing that it was like 2012, 2013, all the explosion of Kickstarter. It was really inspiring for me. And it was seeing that pushed me to put Joden on Kickstarter, and that was kind of the beginning of Thunder Lotus for me.
Right. As for me, I'm a decade older than Will, so my background goes a bit longer. But essentially, I've been playing games for all my life. When I was a teenager, I was in the classroom, and I should have been studying more, but I was designing pen and paper RPGs basically. And at some point, I moved to Paris to work, and then I met a couple of friends of mine who worked at Ubisoft back then. It was in 2005, something like this. And then in 2006, I was summoned by an actual, a friend of mine, bracket, like someone who is an actual, common relationship that Will and I have. And he was the CEO of EA Montreal, and I started working there as a game designer on a couple of projects. And I moved to Ubisoft in 2008, 9, something like this, where I stayed for almost a decade. And I worked mainly on level design and game design. And more specifically on the Assassin's Creed franchise. I've been level design director for a couple of games there, Watch Dogs 2 as well, some other games. And then that's at some point I was like looking at what I was doing, and it didn't feel that much rewarding to a degree. And I was really into into indie gaming. That's when I actually was aware of what was done here in Thunder Lotus, and I met Will, and here we are. It was a very short summary of it.
Well, Nick, why didn't it feel fulfilling on the larger games? I'm just curious.
Well, actually, it's and Will was the first to tell me, no, you should never say that about other companies. I think the work done in Ubisoft is absolutely awesome, and it's world class things that happens there. And as Will said, we're extremely lucky to be in a city that allows us to work on such really good titles as Assassin's Creed. But at the same time, for me, it felt like I've always felt like games should have, a purpose. And I'm not saying that's not what Assassin's Creed does. Actually, what Assassin's Creed does is one of the few games that actually try to do something in a very compelling way. But for me, it felt like I couldn't really achieve a degree of I don't know, maybe like a more artistic approach to games.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it felt like at the time, like it was in a smaller structure that this type of goals could be achieved. But the thing that also drawn me through Thunder Lotus is the fact that I felt like what was done here was, really like of very high quality. Like it felt like indie games that were made with, an excellency, spirit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel the same way looking at your games, at the Thunder Lotus games. And speaking of Thunder Lotus, Will, when you started Thunder Lotus, did you have a specific vision for what you wanted to do with the company?
For the company, I knew that we wanted to make PC indie games. That was the beginning. But when you're starting out, it's hard to differentiate the company from the games, especially your first game.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the focus when we started was on Joden, on that first game, making sure that all of our efforts were on that, and looking at studios that that I admire, either in the indie space or in the AAA space. You look at games studios like Supergiant or Clay or Nintendo, Blizzard. Even Ubisoft as well to a certain extent. You want to be able to build the studio brand, but that takes time, and it takes several releases of several excellent games, right? That's kind of like the path that I saw anyways. That's the kind of thing that we were going after. And that really, it's really hard when you're an entrepreneur and you're starting your studio and all that. You really need to focus. And for me, it was clear that we needed to focus on quality as much as possible, and that if we do something that's of high quality and high standards, and eventually we'll be rewarded for it. And Spiritfarer is kind of a great example of that, right? Because Spiritfarer is a much bigger success than our previous games, and it's stepping stones always to get to this point. And a lot of learnings from Jotun that went into Sundered, a lot of learnings from Sundered that went into Spiritfarer, and that kind of brings us to where we are today.
Well, when you say focus on quality, I think we all as developers say that we're going to do that, but what specifically does that mean to you? And what did that mean you needed to change about Thunder Lotus versus your previous work experiences?
Yeah. Well, in mobile games, I was doing, free to play. So I was doing a bit of monetization as well, all that, a lot of focus on, retention, mechanics and stuff like that. And I think that was one of the things that was really not as interesting to me, and why I wanted to go into PC indie games, because I saw that as an outlet for, okay, we can just focus on, the player experience. And I think as time has gone on, that the definition of what that means has kind of become more clear. But for me today, I think that the focus on quality, it means always thinking of the player's experience and making sure that, compared to other games out there, compared to, experiences that we've had, making sure that, when you put one of our games, when you put the controller down, or you put your mouse to the side and you finish the game and you're at the end credits, how are you feeling, and what is the experience that you're taking away from that? And kind of that is kind of maybe like the tip of the spear, in the sense that the final result of all the work as developers we get to, but how do you want a player who's played your game and just finished your game to feel about the experience, and what have they learned, what have they felt, how have they gotten there? And I think that's kind of the end result. Obviously it's very hard to get to that point, and getting to that point is never guaranteed. Even with Spiritfarer, up until very, very, very late.
Nah, it wasn't.
Until very late, you're never sure that you're actually going to make it, right? But luckily, in this case, we did. But But yeah, I think for that's kind of the focus on the player, not getting distracted with other things that, maybe obviously everything is important. Marketing is important. The price point of the game is important. Everything surrounding the game is important. All the production, business side, everything. But if you can, I think that's our privilege as indie developers, that we can kind of be like, hey, we're artists and we just want to do this, and we can kind of focus on that. I think it makes for a very authentic experience.
Well, I got to ask, because it's something I think about all the time. When does quality run headlong into budget and deadlines?
That's the crux of it all. I mean, it's
that's the biggest challenge, I think.
Yeah.
The answer to that is all the time.
Right.
Always. Usually it's when at some point you have to have that deadline, right? You have to have the deadline, and you physically have, a certain amount of dollars that you can spend, right? Mm-hmm. So that's definitely part of it. I think that's one of the hardest things in game dev, and from what I've talked to, most other studios and all that, it's always, how do you get those internal deadlines respected? How do you make the call, when you have to go for something, or when you can delay, or when you can push back. And I mean, Spiritfarer is a great example of very some very difficult decisions towards the end of production, where we had an opportunity to be out now in the Nintendo Direct, the Indie World, on August 18th, and it was an amazing opportunity, and it's something that we just couldn't, that we just had to do, because it would be so important for us and important for the game, and the marketing and visibility coming from that. So that was kind of like, okay, well, we have to ship here. We're shipping on 27 different SKUs, 27 different platforms simultaneously, and we have to, but we also have to push
a metaphorical number, of course.
Yeah, almost metaphorical. But yeah, no, it's a huge challenge.
I can see that from your perspective, Will. It would be articulated this way, but from my perspective, I also saw every game. That game, when we started it, we started with an intent, which was, we always came back to the why, and that's a bit what Will, brushed upon a few seconds ago, which is, what is the game about? What is that game doing that is unique to it? To me, that's the core of what I do, is trying to think of ways to express something through our unique medium, right? It's about, quality is also in there in a way. I mean, it's there. It has to be trying to achieve something. I mean, if we didn't even try, we could have spent countless, man hours, and then the deadline we wanted, if we couldn't really achieve it, right? It has to have the game itself, the product, the piece has to have, yeah, exactly. It has to have something at its core that means something to us. We would never have, in my opinion, and I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, Will, but we would never have, green lighted something which we would have felt was subpar,
Well, hopefully. I mean, that's what we like to. That's what we like to think, anyways, and I think that's what we're definitely trying to do. And yeah, I mean, that's the if we can achieve that purpose, in a way that's cheaper on the production side, then we should try and do that, and you just try and find all these different ways that you can maximize the intent. And I think that's a lot of what art, but entertainment in general is about. It's about how well can you execute on the intent, and I think that's something that you need to have a strong intent, and you need to have a clear idea of what your intent is, and then how do you make that happen. And yeah, like Nick was saying, and kind of what I was saying before, how do you want the player to feel when they put down the controller? How well did we execute on that intent? How well did people understand that? Did people understand the message? Did people connect with the game in the way that we wanted them to?
Do you think people have with Spiritfarer?
To a degree, I think yes. hopefully. But
I certainly did. I mean, I'll admit it. I read a lot about what you said when it came to the games design, and I
yeah,
feel like you've delivered on the promise.
cool. Well, thank you. It's I'm very glad to hear that. I mean, yeah, it feels like we did. Um, we've received tons of very, very touching emails and communications about how it actually like changed to a very small degree people's lives.
Mhm.
I think that might have something to do with the current condition of the fact that we have to endure a pandemic crisis. But even though, I mean, I think we managed to have the point being passed across. I mean, it felt like it was people responding very well to it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at any metric, the game is a big success. In terms of impact, like Nick was saying, we've gotten a lot of private emails and stuff like that. And I mean, just looking at the Steam score is something that we've always tried to, you want to try and reach the overwhelmingly positive, and that's an extremely hard thing to do, and it's something that's pretty much out of your control, I think, up to a certain extent. But what we've always run into in the past with our games is that people had an expectation when going into our games, and then that expectation wasn't fully met in that way. And I think the user scores on Steam are an exact. I think they're a great indicator of what did people think the game was about, and then when they actually played it, did they agree with it, and did it go above and beyond their expectations? And I think that's a really strong indicator of having succeeded in that regard, for sure.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I know it took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting to experience a game that was, frankly, relaxing and was a nice escape from probably one of the more challenging years that most people have had in modern history. And it just seemed really well timed. And the message that you have in the game about death and sort of an optimistic view of the afterlife was, I thought, refreshing. But I want to ask you more about making the transition from Joden and Sundered to Spiritfarer. So what inspired you to move from more traditional platforming in Sundered in particular to what felt like a totally different game with exploration and crafting in Spiritfarer?
Yeah, well, after I'd say going from game to game was a big challenge, especially at the beginning. The first time when we shipped Jotun on September 29th, 2015, and then we had a submission deadline for funding on October 7th. Like a week later. So we had to scramble as a team and figure out what Sundered was, and to pitch that to the Canada Media Fund, which funded Jotun. They funded Sundered as well. They're a federal program in Canada that fund a lot of TV and but also several game studios in Canada. So that was a mess, a catastrophe. And then from that point on, we vowed to, do better in terms of project transitions. And so when we went from Sundered to Spiritfarer, before Sundered had shipped, we'd already been, shopping around a pitch at GDC for Spiritfarer, and we'd already applied for funding through the CMF and a few other places as well. So we were much better at that point. But I think there was a lot of learn in terms of like just the games themselves. When we finished Joden, we looked at the game and said, okay, well, what worked, what didn't work? How do we do something that's different, but also learning from that? We did the same thing from Sundered, and I think as a studio, we've kind of had a tendency to overcorrect. So with Joden, we said, okay, well, obviously the art style, our artists on our team are incredible, incredibly talented artists, animators. So that obviously needs to stay. And I mean, they wouldn't have changed anyways because they're the artists on the team. But that was a huge positive. The big boss fights was another obviously big big positive for Jotun. But what didn't work was, well, the levels in between were kind of boring, and the game was very short. It was about 5.5 hours to go through it all. So, we had a lot of coverage from streamers and YouTubers and stuff like that, but they played 5 hours and then they kind of moved on. So it weren't necessarily maximizing people's engagement with the game, or you didn't really have enough meat there to really, sink your teeth into as a player. So with Sundered, we went, pretty extreme in terms of the difficulty and the combat and the hordes and all that. And, I wanted to do something different. So trying to, make a procedural Metroidvania, and there were obviously several other games with that same idea, who had looked into the same crystal ball as us, I guess, at that time. And then we kind of botched Sundered's launch. It's a long story, but basically the game was just way too hard when it launched. It hurt our reviews, and then it hurt the game. And that's our responsibility. But we also shipped after 2 small games called Hollow Knight and Dead Cells, which basically reinvented the 2D, the standard for 2D action platformers in the indie games. So we're responsible for certain things on Sundered, but obviously shipping after those 2 monsters definitely wasn't the greatest. But going after Sundered and that launch and all that, I mean, one of the takeaways on the team was, well, Will, you can't be creative director anymore. There's too much going on with the studio, and your role as CEO is taking up too much time. And the team was right. And up to that point, we'd been really successful in terms of making, interesting games that were very beautiful, and that were relatively fun, but we wanted to amp up the fun in our games. We wanted to make a game that was beautiful, that had, really strong intent, really strong meaning, but was also really fun to play. And then internally on the production side, it was kind of getting to a point where it was clear that my role had transitioned more into the CEO role, and I had to move away from production and the day-to-day of production. So that's when we opened up a position for creative director. And that's when Nick ended up joining us at the end of 2017. And at that point, I think we already had, a relatively clear idea of where we're going with the game, with Spiritfarer. But he really came in and was like, well, yes, but you need to take this way further, and we need to look at the mechanics and how this management game is going to work, and how the spirits have to be the core of the experience, and the real core of the game, and building around them and making everything tick around there. So.
It's funny. I remember the first day I arrived at the studio, there was a stand-up meeting every morning, and it was a board, like it was Post-its on the wall, and under Will's task there was like, hire a creative director, and he just like removed the Post-it the first day. It was very fun. But yeah, that's how it transitioned.
Post-its work.
Yeah.
At a certain team size, they work. At a certain team size, they stop working. But no, we shipped 2 games before that with Post-its on a wall. So.
Well, actually, that leads to another question about just how your process works. Do you all create your macro design first, or your story? I mean, Spiritfarer has some pretty complex mechanics, and to me, at least, in terms of how the macro is laid out, how crafting works, the economy. How do you handle that normally?
Well, first, Will said it a bit. I started by just looking at the core idea, and the core idea was a very simple, very strong, and that's what actually, convinced me to join the company. It was that on one side, it was an old, picture from Charon, so in the Greek mythology, the ferryman of the souls. Mm-hmm. And on the other side, it was a picture from My Neighbor Totoro from Hayao Miyazaki, mm-hmm. And just that idea, allowed me to, as we'll say, to establish, a direction. Now, for the structuring of it, I think quite soon into it, maybe like 2 or 3 months, I had like laid out. The first thing I did, I don't know if you remember it, but it was I took a wall and I just tried to describe the game. To go back a bit in history, that pitch I just gave you was the pitch Will gave before I joined the company. And the first question everyone asked was, and Will question was, it's a trap.
I don't remember.
Well, the question was, well, it was like, yeah, but how does it play? What is it? What do you do? What's the loop? How do you do it? Everyone was convinced by the strength of the pitch itself. It's just like how the game design was articulated around this that was really weird. And it is weird. I mean, Spiritfarer is a bit of a weird game. You do have like platforming elements and complex economic loops, but all of those systems, they only work for one thing, which is taking care of people. And that's the first thing I did, which is like, as we'll say, the spirits are front and center. They are the one that you have to care about. Now, all the mechanics, they have to revolve around this. And it was a mix of things that were already there, like picture everything like 3C. You had the character moving around a bit. So I worked a bit on that, but the team beforehand had very strong experience and very high quality development on that specific topic. So it was working pretty well. But everything else had to be, I've been making games for a long time, and something that I always say that story, but I told you in the beginning of the interview, I started in EA, and I don't know if you've met that guy, but at the beginning, it was in 2007, but Bing Gordon was in charge of, he was the CCO in EA, so the Chief Creative Officer for Electronic Arts. And they came up with the idea of having an X. I'm sure, Ted, you're familiar with it.
Oh, yeah.
And
we've actually worked with EA before, so I remember.
Exactly. And
for sure.
It actually struck with me that you have to have very simple elements that help you define a game. And it's everything but easy. Like every studio tries to do that. Every team tries to come up with this. I mean, it's a very tough thing. But lo and behold, sometimes it works. Sometimes you have to have the idea of a very simple concept. And to me, it always felt like game design was a tool rather than a mean to an end. So, as I told you, like mechanics should all have worked towards helping people around. There was already the idea of having a light farm sim game. So Stardew Valley and Harvest Moon were names that were like always up in the air when we started working on the project. So it was rather easy to actually transition from that concept of having an evolving management farm sim like structure into something that helps you focus on people and the reason why you do that. Actually, it was pretty simple, and it's something that I've seen repeated to me by players, which was, I love farm sims, I love Stardew Valley, but usually towards the end my interest drops because I don't know why I'm doing all that. And for us, it was rather an easy solution. The reason why you do all this is for other people, and it worked in the metaphor we created. It worked in the concept. So it felt a bit natural,
So were there other games that you had looked at for educational purposes to understand where to take the various systems and how to sort of improve on things that were already out there?
From a gameplay perspective, I'd say yes. I mean, I remember at the beginning we had also as an example.
Yeah, Undertale
exactly
as an inspiration as well. Yeah.
Right, Undertale was interesting because it was like trying to do something like really a very classic formula, which was the turn-by-turn RPG formula, and try to spin it on its head and try to do something different and say you can do every encounter without really having to fight. And that was a spin that was interesting. So it was entirely different from what we did in Spiritfarer, but still it was that concept of trying to actually use the same mechanics as you would do it normally, but in a completely different context.
Yeah, also the idea of having a bunch of characters and stuff like that. If you look at games, even like I don't know, like a Mass Effect 2, where it's all about the crew and all about the people that you have to go get, and that kind of idea. Absolutely.
But to go back to Ted's question about game mechanics in other games, something that is quite there in Spiritfarer are minigames, and that's something which is in my opinion, very important to nail down as a designer, which is understanding the core principle behind challenge and difficulty and all that. I mean, something that I'm really thankful to Ubisoft is to go a big into what a company did is they actually trained every designer into doing something they call RCP, which is Rational Creative Process. It stemmed from something that emerged, if I remember correctly, from a talk made by a lead game designer at Naughty Dog on Uncharted 1. And he talked about rational level design, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And it's just very specifically, the thinking of the process in a much more rational way. And minigames are a very good example of that. So we created minigames also based on tons of minigames that you can play in games like, Mario Party. And I've been always, a fan of the WarioWare series way back when. So it's tiny elements of game design that go together and that help you create that chain, and then you create the loops on them. But from an inspirational, principle, yes, Farm Sim, so Stardew Valley, Harvest Moon, Undertale, and to me other games, and which is something that coming back from that rational creative process concept of trying to design around rational elements. Minigames are awesome because you can actually boil down to a few mechanics, a few inputs, a few challenge systems. And every tons of mini games that happen in very cool games like Mario Party, or I was a fan of the WarioWare series way back when, are examples of how you can actually dissect a bit a mechanic and how to translate that into something that is fun and fulfilling to do. So to a degree, Spiritfarer is a collection of things that work together rather than continuum of things. I don't know if it answers, but yeah. So in two inspirations. Yeah.
Sure. And I'm glad you mentioned minigames because that is a really fun aspect of the game for me because it keeps things varied. Since you were, I imagine, trying out a lot of different minigames, were there mechanics that you were excited about at first, but then ended up abandoning?
Yeah, actually, so many. Well, we prototyped a lot. I mean, that's a very cool thing we had working there, which is we had a very talented junior programmer with us, Luke, and we made tons of prototypes of mini games. But the biggest surprise for us was how hard it was to create mini games that were fun to do in co-op. I mean, the co-op was at the beginning of the project a very strong aspect of Spiritfarer, and we wanted to make sure that another couch co-op player could join. And it amounted to be, it's hard to do everything at once. And every time we had a co-op mechanic, it was hard to find the good counterpart in single player and the opposite. I don't know if you see what I mean. Like there is a mechanic where you have to cut a tree down, and in co-op you have to synchronize your move. It's really simple. It's not really challenging, but it's just it helps you have fun with someone else. So playing that in single player translated kind of poorly. I mean, it works, but it's not really. It's not a fun activity per se. So I guess co-op was the biggest challenge for mini games. Some others worked a bit more. I mean, there is an activity in the Foundry where you have to, push a bellow, and it works quite well in co-op because you can do that alternatively, one and the other. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I guess that was the biggest hurdle.
Yeah. Well, how long did it take you to find the fun factor? Or that it was that, did you, or maybe a better question is, did you have a light bulb moment in the early part of prototyping where you realized that the game was going to be fun?
Oh my God, no. That was terrible. Actually, that was we're still, the game has shipped like a month ago, and we're still processing what's going on. And, we have tons of post-mortem to do, like internally and technically. But most probably, the thing that will come up is how far it was to feel what the game was. It was extremely clear in my mind, but only in my mind. And I was extremely scared. Remember like discussion we had with Will like a couple of months ago about, we don't really have it yet, right? Because the fun factor to me was more of did the game deliver on the promise we made, which is kind of make people cry in a way. So having that emotional connection to the passengers and to the stories and to the life and feel that you are losing something. that came really late because it had to be like a mix of everything together. You had to have the music, you had to have the animations, the characters, the systems working.
Yeah, but it was also the accumulation of all the things leading up to that moment. So like at the beginning of 2020, we had you could play the game for like 5 or 6 hours until things started to be too rough or not implemented yet and stuff like that. And for me, that's when we had the quest system in. It's when we had all the building blocks, the exploration, the building, the quests, the spirits. That's the point for me where I was like, okay, this it's going to work. You're going to connect to Gwen. Gwen is the deer spirit. It's the first spirit on the boat.
Mm-hmm. She's my favorite character, by the way. She's cool. Awesome.
Yeah, she's really cool. And only this year, I played the game. I was like, oh, okay, it's going to work. it's if we can execute on that, and then obviously, in the goodbye and all that is a lot of, music is an enormous part of emotion in any medium.
Well, Will, in your position, did you have to spend a lot of time convincing others that even though the bells and whistles weren't there to fill in the blanks, that it was going to be great?
So the beauty of having an amazing art team is that they make beautiful things. So that makes my job much easier. And when you're trying to sell something, it's much, or pitch something or convince partners or to work with you. It's much easier if you have a really strong image, a really strong video. It makes my life way easier. And it's the same way that people approach games in general when they, the first thing you see or hear about a game is usually like a GIF or a screenshot or a trailer. Obviously humans are very, very visual. So for me, having that strength in the studios it makes my life way easier.
Let's talk about the art, because for me, when playing the game, I was wondering most of the time, how did you create such beautiful hand-drawn art, or what looks like hand-drawn art with such fluidity without employing a team of 100 tweeners? I mean, that's like an old school question, but what were the tools that you used to really create that nice fluid hand-drawn approach?
Will, you want to answer or?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So it's both pretty simple and pretty complicated. I mean, the process is exactly the same as the process used in classical 2D animation, which is you have an art director, which is that person who actually makes all the drawings. So the references for all characters and objects and every environments and everything. And then you have to have animators that understand really well the intention behind the drawing, not just understanding, but be able to reproduce them extremely faithfully. So Alex, our very talented animation director, he was really good in working with Johnny as well, our art director. The two of them were working in pair, have been working in pair for a long time, so they know and they understand each other, and they know what to do to make things simpler for the animation side and better for the art side. An example of this is Stella. It was an awesome work made by Joanie and Will to do it, because it wasn't even there then yet. But there is an amount. Yeah, there is an amount of the Stella.
It's not me. It's all Joe.
No, I know. It's still Joanie, but Stella was there when I arrived. She was already designed, right. And there is a specific amount of details of silhouette that she knows translates really well into animation. It's all very heavy, to be honest. I mean, things that player might expect as something simple is really complex for us, like customization. Like, hey, I want to change Stella's hat. Well, it turns out it's entirely impossible, because you have to make that character and animate her entirely by hand, frame by frame. But the shape of the hat, the clothing, the colors, the animators have to be able to make tons of frames really fast. And if the character is too complex, you just can't.
I'll jump in here though. It's not fully frame by frame. There's a lot of cheating going on. Right. And a lot of tweening. We use our animators use Toon Boom, and you can do what's it called? Tweening, and you cheat. You don't have to redraw all the frames, and you're asking how you do what they've done without having 100 animators. Is that you cheat at every single opportunity. You take every single shortcut that you can. When you can, just use your puppet, even though certain animations will be redrawn frame by frame in the more traditional side. If you don't have a change of angle on an animation, so if you don't have, for example, if you're looking at a character, let's say Stella, in her running animation, she's running from left to right. Her arms and legs move up and down, or left to right, and there's no angle change on them, so you don't actually have to redraw them. In Toon Boom, you can use the puppet on that character to move the bones around, in the same way that you'd animate a 3D character.
Yeah, there's a technical mix, but there is still a very important, relationship between the art and the animation itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, coming from a 3D world, it's sort of mind-blowing to me that you can make what you've made, which 3D generally makes things a little bit easier because you make the model once and you animate it and you can flatten it if you want to. But I think it really comes through. Your games, all of your games, have a really beautiful traditional approach that sets them apart. And with that in mind, do you feel that your identity, your future is in stylized games? Or do you see yourself branching off in a different direction someday?
So, big announcement. Thunder Lotus's next game.
First-person shooter?
VR.
Okay. All right.
No, we're definitely sticking with 2D hand-drawn animation. I mean, it's like I was kind of saying before, your identity as a studio exists only through the games. I mean, not only through the games you make, but is strongly created, influenced by the games that you make. And I think it's definitely safe to say that the 2D art for us has become a huge trademark, and it's something that we're definitely sticking with.
Oh, that's fantastic to hear. And I'll say too, I'll just add to what you're saying. I also think that the characters you make become part of the identity of the studio. And with that in mind, I know that we at Insomniac spend an enormous and ridiculous amount of time agonizing over character design, character personality, etc. What was it like coming up with Stella? Was it easy? Was it just sort of an immediate decision? You knew what you wanted to make, or did you go back and forth between different genders, different looks?
Right. Well, I can talk about, after the design, but we can talk about the design of the character itself.
Yeah, I mean, originally Stella and Daffodil were brother and sister. In the first original pitch, it was really important.
I didn't even know. Wow.
Yeah. And the first, if you look at like the first PowerPoints, we ended up showing a few people way back when. That would have been in spring 2017, I guess. We had big hats and similar characters and stuff, but the character design, I mean, I can't really talk about it so much. It's much more Jo.
Yeah, Joden. Yeah.
She's an extremely talented character designer, among other things. I know that part of the process for her, one important thing is, just having something that's iconic, that's different, a character that doesn't really look or remind you of other characters is something that she really strives for. And actually, it's interesting because on our first game, Jotun, I was more involved in the creative character design and stuff like that because of the context and because it was I was working more alone at that point and the team hadn't really been built up. You can tell that Thora is a bit more in the Viking tropes and maybe a bit less original in that sense, whereas Esh is definitely a different in a different direction, and you can see kind of Joanie, who's a much better character designer than I am, obviously being able to do it. And for Stella, It was about the Everlight. It was about the big hat, having an outfit or a character that someone can cosplay as well, something that'll stand out, that'll look different, that you can imagine someone cosplaying as a really important thing for Stella. But I'm sure that there's a million things that I'm leaving out. But it's work with great people, and you'll have great results. This is basically my takeaway.
Sure. Well, I love your point about cosplay though too. That's something great to take into consideration when designing characters. And I know I don't, but that's something I think we should all be thinking about, because our fans really do some of our fans identify with our characters. So
yeah, absolutely. I think think of the old times when we could go to conventions, and you have thousands of people walking around, and all these people and cosplaying and these different characters, and what stands out, what makes someone stand out in that crowd. And I think it's kind of you could also turn that into a metaphor for making games in general, but yeah, I mean it's another lens that you can use to kind of make sense.
It's also there's also something to be said about Stella's identity and as a person. She's a woman. She's a brown woman, and I think it's something which is important to us. That's the 3 games produced by the studio all have like strong female characters as hero. That's something which was important to me as well. When I joined the company, I knew that they wanted to do something different. Mm-hmm. There are a bunch of young people, and it's refreshing. I mean, they have an outlook on things which tremendously helps me, shaping something that I'm proud of, which is we make games that we feel bring something, different to the table. We've got tons of. I'm in no way, able. I'm a white man, and we all are. The 3 of us, we are white men, unless I'm mistaken.
No, you're right.
And I think it's extremely important to give voice to something which is different than 30-something male heroes in games. I believe it. I think it's important for us.
I think it's great. And I think it's also great that you're showing other independent developers, indie developers, sort of an example of how to include diversity in your games, and also how to succeed as an independent developer, which is brutally, brutally hard. So what is it like for you to be an indie in 2020?
Oh, that's a tough question. Well, to me, it means that it's it's easy to say now that Spiritfarer is out because we have some success with the game, but it feels freer than anything. It feels like you can actually tackle. Well, I think that to a degree, I mean, we are in a very good space because we can do games that express tons of different things, and I think there is a market now out there for players to understand those things. I mean, it was felt to me like video games were in their infancy like a decade ago, where you had to do like I was always comparing this to like Hollywood blockbuster from the 50s, where you had to do something of a specific format, otherwise you just wouldn't find your market. And it feels to me like doing an indie game now, you have like that liberty to actually tackle subject matters and representation in a way that you will find your audience as long as you do it properly. So to me, it feels nice and better, but maybe Will thinks differently because he sees all the cascading amount of games out there, which is a bit intimidating.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the creative standpoint, it's obviously a really, really amazing time. I mean, on the business CEO aspect of it, it's in ways, I mean, we're very lucky and very privileged to have started in 2014, even if in 2014 it already felt like we'd kind of missed the boat on indie games in a certain way. We'd missed at least that initial, before Steam greenlight, if you could get your indie game on Steam, you were guaranteed to sell whatever, how many copies, because that was how things were being gated. Now that those barriers to entry go down, I mean, this is obviously everyone this is a tired subject at this point, but discoverability, blah, 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 barriers to entry and everything. But I think what's the hardest for me about games right now is that the quality level is just so high.
Yeah, really, really high.
And in terms of everything, in terms of visuals, in terms of game design, in terms of quality of experience, in terms of, the amount of high quality games that are coming out is just enormous and enormously, extremely, competitive. So for me, that kind of, in a way, now the studio, well, not in a way, but now the studio is obviously better positioned than we were with our previous games, and hopefully, knock on wood, our future games do well and are able to kind of hit that same quality and that same success. But every other studio in the world that's kind of our size or making the same kind of game as us or in the same sort of market, everyone's getting better, everyone's pushing harder, all the budgets are going up, which is interesting. Obviously now you see like the ZeniMax acquisition. It's almost like but it's just the consolidation of the market, and kind of the same thing that happened with retail in the 90s, 2000s, where games were more and more competitive, pushing for shelf space. Now there's infinite shelf space, but it's still the same problems, right, of discoverability and all that. So I don't know. It'll be interesting for us to as things move on, and how the market always changes as well, how distribution changes, how subscription is going to change things, how cloud is going to change things. It's just, there's so many things, and I haven't been in the games industry for that long, but I'm sure you feel it even more the longer you've been in it. But it feels like things change every 2 years completely. But from what I gather, as long as you're doing the right thing and making high quality games and great experiences, we should find a way to make some money and reach our audience and continue.
Well, with that in mind, though, if you could change, let's say, 2 things in the industry, what would they be?
Wow. Just 2 things.
Just two
things. I don't know. The industry is so big. Obviously, that's a good question.
I have one thing at the very least, which is somewhat, I don't know how to say that, but it's and I kind of brushed up on it a bit earlier, but as I said, I'm a 40-year-old white dude, and I really, really wish there was be more, more equality in games, more representation of every gender and race and color. To be honest, I know it's easy to say. It feels like a consensual thing to say now, but I really, really believe it is. And yeah, that's the first thing, and to make sure that we have that kind of representation. And for the second point, to me, also I'm getting older. I'm still relatively young, but I feel that we should try to make. Well, I know we already, but games for old people, like in a way that games are evolving towards a certain, I don't know, like change the paradigm a bit. But it's happening. It's happening right now. Games are really diverse, and you see tons of things. But yeah, it's like game that for an older audience, made by a more diverse cast of creative.
Well, I will say for the second one, I think it's working, at least from my perspective. I don't know if I'm old. I'm 52, yeah. And my 18-year-old daughter and I enjoyed Spiritfarer equally and for completely different reasons. I as I said before, I wasn't looking for a game that would stress me out or make me feel like I constantly had to achieve certain goals. And Spiritfarer's pacing was perfect for me. And whereas my daughter, my 18-year-old, loved the connections, the personal connections, the social aspect of the game within the game. So I don't know. I think you did something really special with Spiritfarer.
Cool. I'm really, really glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I didn't want to take Will's time as well about the 2 things I wanted to change in the industry.
No, but I think that's for me. there's so many things, right? There's so many different things in the industry. It's a crazy industry. Everything changes so fast. There are a lot of problems in the industry. There are a lot of things that could be done better. I think one thing that I would like us to continue to try to push for and to do better and to improve on is to make games that do have a positive impact on people's lives. I think that's really important, and it ties back to the purpose that we were talking to before. I hate. I mean, maybe we shouldn't be quoting Elon Musk, but I think he was the person who I saw this from. Where you have an impact over your life. Where imagine the impact you have as a curve, and you could have a little bit of positive impact on a lot of people, or you could have a lot of positive impact on a fewer amount of people, or maybe you're super amazing and you can have a huge amount of impact on a lot of people. And to me, that really resonated. My wife is a psychologist, so she falls into the category of people who have a very big impact on a fewer amount of people. And for me, that comparison and that's what gives meaning a lot to what we're doing. And obviously, as the founder of the studio and all that, I want us to be able to keep making games for a long time. I want our team to be happy. I want, we need to make money as a studio to survive. But having that purpose for me is really important. And I think it's something that, that games can do more and can improve people's lives for the better. And I think it's really something that's possible. Like, it happens in games. We're obviously not the first developers to try and do this, but it also happens, in books and movies and everywhere, and art. And I think that's kind of the fundamental good thing that we as game developers can do is have a positive impact on people's lives. And I think that's something that should be really, however that means. Maybe it's a broad answer, but I don't know. For me, that's important.
I would say it's not. I mean, it's funny you said that because you and I are totally in sync. That is literally our vision statement at Insomniac. It's to create games that have a lasting and positive impact on people's lives. So it's great to hear that from you. I think that we as an industry have so much power when it comes to the messages that we share. Yeah. And I think I really do think developers have recognized that over the last 5 years. And we're continuing to see sort of more positive messages and messages of inclusion and, right. Positivity. It's all good. And so I think I'd like to end just to get some advice from you guys. I know that there are many folks who are interested in getting into the games industry who listen to these podcasts. And you've charted, I think, a really interesting course and are going from strength to strength as an indie. So what advice do you have to somebody who may be trying to decide if they want to jump off that cliff and do their own thing as an indie developer?
From a creative perspective, I'd say just make games. Make as many games as you can in as many formats as you want. Board games, RPGs, I don't know, sports. Try to do something, and see what works with you. See what are the things that resonate with what you want to accomplish. My nephew is in love with Factorio, which is an awesome game. Factorio is, I don't know if you guys know about it, but it's a game in which you have to create a factory chain, so you optimize the way the gears work together. It's absolutely awesome. It's delightful, but it's really it's both simple and complicated. Okay. Yet it's a pure system. That's all there is to it. But the amount of power it gives you over your own ability to articulate logically a chain of operation is absolutely awesome. And that's a game. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Us, which is about characters and people and dealing with loss and dealing with death. But we still live in the same space, which is games in general. So from an indie perspective and from any developer's perspective, all of this is possible. And I think if you do something you really, really, really believe in, you have to make sure you try to go as far as possible in that on that path. I know it sounds a bit cliche, right? It's like believe in your dreams and you'll do something, but it's you have
compromise, right? I mean, I think that's what I hear you saying.
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
It's so easy when it comes to budgets, deadlines, and just the reality of life to just find yourself in in compromising positions, because sometimes it feels like there's no way out, but there always is, right? If to your point, if you stick to your guns and your passion.
Yeah, but it's really tough. It is really tough.
Yeah, that focus is really, really, really important. I think for me, the people who'd want to, jump off or get into games or whatever, through which is just to have that strong focus and knowing what they want to do. Because I think something that people often mistake is or don't quite grasp when they're starting out is the difference between making a game and making a studio. It's two very different things, and I think it leads to a lot of problems. But it's kind of knowing what you want and why you're doing something, and to go from there. And because if you just want to make a game, like there's nothing stopping you, right? There's like no reason at this point. Like all the information is out there. All the tools are free. Everything, there are a million tutorials. You can literally buy full games on the Unity asset store, right, and go from there. But yeah, I think the useful bit of advice for me, I think, is to make sure you know the difference between making a game and making a studio.
That is an excellent distinction and great advice. I wish I'd had that advice when I was starting. I didn't know the difference and had to find out the hard way. So that's awesome. Well, guys, if people have more questions for you, are you on Twitter? Do you respond to folks on social media? Are there ways for people to get in contact with you?
We're a small team though, so we're still in the post-launch process of more having like requests about the game being bugged and having a problem. But yeah, we have a hotline. We're there on Twitter. We have an awesome, very talented 2 guys team in PR and marketing working with us.
Wow.
So everyone can still hit us with questions. We'll try to answer to the best of our capacity. But yeah, absolutely. So Twitter, we're pretty much everywhere, like Facebook, on our website as well.
So folks who just look up Thunder Lotus on Twitter?
It's at Thunder Lotus on Twitter.
Yes.
Okay.
And thunderlotusgames.com for anything else, but probably Twitter is the best for questions.
Right.
Great. Well, Nick, Will, thank you guys so much for your time. Thanks for sharing all that you did, and congratulations on Spiritfarer. It's just such a beautiful game.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.